guys might not get to kind of see or hear in other contexts. So what I'm going to do is share a test application that I have to kind of show you what the application looks like and walk you through that process a little bit, and go through some tips that I have for you as you're filling out applications. And then certainly any questions that you have, feel free to put them in the chat or we can talk about them at the end. So before I came over to the College of Engineering, I've been over here for about 5 years now. I actually worked in the graduate school. I was the director of graduate admissions over there. And so I have a lot of experience even outside of the College of Engineering. And part of what I did over there was actually implement the application system that we use currently here at Purdue. So I have a lot of background in that area as well. So want to share some of that with you. As I get started here, let me share my screen. There we go. All right, so just kind of high level, like I said, I've got just a few slides I'm going to run through, and then I'm going to jump into the actual application and walk through some of that as well. So trying to think through some tips for the application. So one thing that some of you may already be aware, some of you might not be, when you're applying to graduate school, there's really 3 different levels that you interact with at the university. So there's the central graduate school office, so in this case, the Purdue University Graduate School. And they're the ones that manage the online application system. They're the ones that officially grant admission. Any kind of technical issues with the application, they would be the ones to call. And then they're the ones from whom you will actually get that official letter of admission at the end. Then there's also a college office, which is where Jackie and I reside. And we really act as liaisons between the individual departments and kind of that central office. And then you also have the individual school graduate offices. So if you're applying to mechanical engineering, they have a graduate office, Aero and Astro, IE, ECE, wherever you're applying, each of those schools also has a graduate office. And those are the ones that you're going to interact with the most if you have specific questions or when you're kind of going through that process. They're the ones that set the admission requirements. So each school can have different requirements that they're looking for. And so this is something to be definitely aware of when you're applying, not only to Purdue, but any university. Don't rely on your friends who may be applying to a different department, even if it's the same university, because they may have different deadlines, they may have different requirements, they may have an entirely different process that they use. So you really need to pay attention to what your specific program does. So then in these individual graduate school offices, they are also the ones that review the applications. It's actually faculty members. So other professors, there's a committee that sit down and review all of those applications. So it's not staff people like Jackie and I, it's actually faculty members in your department that will be reviewing those. And they're the ones then that recommend admission to the graduate school. And the graduate school then goes through and does kind of a final credential check. They check to make sure that you've got official documents in, that you meet some of the university minimum for GPA and things like that. And then your admission gets granted. So I bring this up because as you go through the application process, you will receive emails from potentially all 3 of these offices at different times throughout the process. And so sometimes it's important to know who are you getting these emails from, who are you responding to? And then also if you have questions, who's the best person to reach out to, kind of what's going on here. So you can kind of think about this structure, these 3 different offices. In general, like I said, a lot of the questions will be directed to your school graduate office because they're the ones that set those individual admission requirements. But all of you are lucky because now you all know Jackie and I. So if you're applying to Purdue, definitely feel free to reach out to us with any questions and we can point you to the right person and the right office within that. So when you're applying to grad school, it's not just kind of a one form and you're done. There's a lot of pieces to the application. So there is an online application form. There's usually an application fee. Here at Purdue for domestic students, it's $60. There are different opportunities to qualify for application fee waivers. And so that's something to pay attention to and to participate in. So some of our summer research programs, if you participate in them, some of them, you'll qualify for an application fee waiver. Coming up here in a couple of weeks on October 3rd and 4th, we've mentioned before, I believe, we have our virtual graduate showcase coming up. This is an online event that you can attend workshops and poster sessions and have different networking opportunities. If you participate in that event, then you can get an application fee waiver. And so then you can apply to Purdue for free. Other universities will have these for different things and as well. So pay attention to that and look for those opportunities as well, because it can start to add up when you're applying to multiple universities. Other piece of the application, we spent last week looking at the statement of purpose. I'm going to talk a little bit more tonight about letters of recommendation. Standardized tests is one I wanted to comment on just a little bit, because there's a lot of discussion out there right now on GREs in particular. And you'll notice a lot of universities, a lot of programs are starting to either make GRE scores optional or eliminating them entirely. There's been kind of a movement in this way over the last couple of years. And through the COVID pandemic, this really just accelerated. And so this is something to pay attention to, because those requirements are shifting. And so make sure you're looking at the different universities, the different programs that you're thinking about applying to, and know whether or not they're expecting you to submit GRE scores there. And again, this also varies by program. Here at Purdue, some of our programs definitely do still require them, and others, they don't want you to submit them at all. So there is definitely a difference there. And then you kind of see some of the other parts of the application there that you'd want to include as well. So the application timeline, again, the deadlines, requirements can vary by program, but in general, we're going to be looking at an August starting term is the most common if you're starting for fall. There are some programs that will do a spring admission. So that's something to look for if you're someone who's going to be graduating in December and want to start right in that January. Identify whether or not your programs allow for that, and then look at those application timelines. But the majority of students will apply for a fall start. And so that timeline then is September, October. So those of you that are seniors right now, this is why we're pushing you right now to draft those essays. If your program does expect you to take the GRE, then make sure you're taking those standardized tests now. And now is also the time to be asking for letters of recommendation. We'll talk more about that. Then November, December is kind of the time frame to make sure that all those pieces of the application are received. So it's not enough to wait till the night before and just submit that online form. You need to have all your essays up. You need to have your test scores in. You need to have your transcripts to the university. Your faculty members need to have their letters of recommendation to the university. So you really do need to start this process now so that everything is in by that November, December. A lot of schools, I said, the deadlines vary. Here at Purdue, a lot of our engineering programs, the deadlines are in December. So December 1 and December 15 are two very common application deadlines that we have here. And then I kind of mentioned here, once you get it in, then sometimes it can be a long wait. They usually start making decisions kind of in that January to March timeframe. And then once you get your offer of admission, they'll usually ask you to accept an offer by April 15th. All right, so letters of recommendation. They typically want these to come from a professor. Sometimes they will accept, particularly if you're applying to more of a non-thesis or a professional master's, then they will accept or even kind of expect letters from more internships, supervisors, things like that. But in general, they really want these letters to come from professors, especially if you are looking at a PhD or considering a PhD track kind of a program. This can include both a form and a letter. These are really, really important. I think this is one of the most overlooked pieces of the application, because students just kind of think of it as okay, this is something somebody else does. I ask a professor, they write the letter, and we're done. But there are things that you can do to ensure that you get some really strong letters of recommendation. And this is probably, next to your statement of purpose, one of the most important parts of your application that the committee really looks at. This is what can set you apart. This is what can explain more, give the committee a fuller picture of who you are and what you bring to the table. And it can vary by program, but typically they want 3. Some programs look for 4, but 3 is pretty common. So just 4 quick tips that I'll give you for your letters of recommendation. The most important one is to get to know your current professors. So if you are a senior now, hopefully you've got some relationships already with some professors. If not, then you've got to be marching double time here and starting to talk to those professors now. Go to their office hours. Start talking to them about your grad school plans and identify people that you may be able to ask for these letters. Those of you that still have a year or 2 before you're going to be applying, you're in a really good position. Now is the time to start talking to your professors. Again, go to their office hours, mention that you're thinking about grad school, ask for their advice, ask them what experiences they would recommend you get along the way. Just start opening that dialogue with them. And that's what's going to allow you to start to stand apart, for you to be more memorable to them. And then also be thinking about the different professors you may work for. Again, if you're thinking about some kind of a research degree, potentially, any research that you do, either during the academic year or if you do a summer research program, those professors are ones that you're going to want to be writing letters of recommendation for you. So make sure you're having conversations with them, talking to them about your grad school plans. Again, asking for their advice. That's just an easy way to talk to them, to open that door, to get them thinking about you as a future grad school candidate. When it comes time to actually asking for a letter of recommendation, make sure you give plenty of notice. And by that, I mean at least a month. And so again, if you're a senior, now is really the time. By October, you need to be asking your professors to write these letters for you. What I always recommend is give them a deadline a little bit earlier than the actual application deadline. So if your application deadline is December 15th, ask that they submit their letter by December 1st, December 5th, December 10th, anything that would give you a little bit of a cushion. So that if something were to happen and they don't get that letter in, you still have a little bit of time to get something in place before that hard deadline. Then you want to make their job as easy as possible. Make sure you're giving them a copy of your statement of purpose, a copy of your resume, and then give them kind of what I call a little cheat sheet. So kind of a bulleted item of some things that they may want to include in their letter. And that can be things like, if you did research with them, highlight out some of the things that hopefully they already know, but that you want to remind them of, that when I was in your lab, I worked on XYZ. Over the summer, I did this, here's some accomplishments. When I was in your class, I did this. If you're asking an advisor for a student org that maybe you were a leader in, these are some of the things I did as a leader in this student org that they can comment on. Just provide a bulleted list of some of those things that they should know, but maybe might not remember, to just help them. And then they can use it, they cannot use it, but at least you've made their job a little easier to write that letter. And then make sure you're following up. Again, check before the deadline to make sure the letter's in, and then send them a thank you once it is in. That's really important and sometimes overlooked. And then once you are admitted into these programs and make your decision about where you're going to grad school, make sure you're circling back with them and let them know where you went. And I've got this note here to think about professors that can talk about different strengths. So in the kind of example I was starting to give, if you have a professor that you've done research with, if you have a professor that you were a leader in a student org and they were the advisor, a professor who, if you've done a couple different research projects, a couple different professors, or somebody that can talk about your academic strengths in coursework and things like that, be thinking about different professors that you can ask for these types of things. All right, and then what I want to do now is jump over and show you.
And while you're transitioning, Janet, I know that one question I get a lot is for letters of rec. Like if you're a younger student and you're applying for summer research, you might ask, like, do I need a letter of recommendation for that? And the answer is yes. Most of the times you do. And so again, that timeline, you want to start thinking early, because most summer research applications are due in January, February, and guess what? You're on break. So you need to be asking your professors probably like around Thanksgiving at the latest, saying, I want to apply to summer research. Will you write me a letter of recommendation? I know that the deadline is January. It's gonna be really awkward because you're gonna be away and I'm gonna be away. And can you write me one? So ask early. Early is always better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a good point. I meant to kind of talk a little bit more about the summer research application too, along with this. So in terms of the timeline for those, a lot of those deadlines, again, it can really vary by the program, but a lot of them are going to be in that January timeframe as well. So again, you're wanting to be applying as early as possible and look into those programs and identify when the application opens and what the deadlines are, and keep track of that now.
As someone who reviews summer research applications, I will tell you that the people who apply early get the most views. So, because your application is in early. So,
yeah, and summer research slots tend to fill on kind of a rolling basis too, right? So a faculty member has a certain number of slots that they're looking for students, and as those fill, even if you're a highly qualified student, if the faculty member has already identified a student and invited them into their lab, then you have less opportunities. So the earlier you can get your application in, the much better it is for your chances. Absolutely. All right, so as we kind of look at the application here, just to give you a sneak peek of what the graduate school application looks like here at Purdue, you would create an account, you log in here, and then it's kind of the menu down the left-hand side. So again, you can see this is not something you just sit down and do the night before the deadline, right? There's some stuff you got to put together and spend some time putting together this application. So a couple of things that I wanted to really highlight. The first place that you're going to start, and a lot of these online applications are going to be similar. Different universities use different platforms, so there's going to be differences between them. But a lot of them are going to have the same types of questions. So they'll look different, but there will be some similarities as well. So you have the opportunity here here at Purdue, we are a system-wide graduate school. So Purdue has 4 campuses that we work with. And so you have the opportunity to apply to any of those programs, all using the same application. So we're on the main campus, the West Lafayette campus. That is by far the largest and the one where the most graduate programs are. But what they recently did, was new starting last year, is they provided applicants the opportunity to choose more than one program. So you can choose up to 3 on a single application. And so what this does is it allows you to apply to multiple programs, only paying that application fee once, rather than before last year. If you wanted to apply to 2 graduate programs, you had to submit 2 different applications and pay 2 different application fees. And now you can apply to 2 with 1 application fee. The thing I will caution you here is that this works best if you're applying to 2 programs that are very similar and kind of makes sense. So like an example that I've got here, we've got a student that applied to mechanical engineering, and then again, like aero astro. So there's a lot of overlap between some of the faculty members, the type of research. If the student is interested in propulsion, then we have faculty members in mechanical engineering doing propulsion. We have faculty members in aero and astro doing propulsion. And so it makes sense that either one of these programs is going to help them towards their career. Things like chemical engineering and the Department of Chemistry. You know, there are a lot of areas that overlap that make sense for this. What we see sometimes happen is students that are not sure what program they want, and so they just take this opportunity as I can apply to 3 programs. I'm just going to pick these 3. And then if the rest of the application doesn't support that, then it actually hurts your chances in any of those programs, because when you apply, the schools can tell that you've applied to multiple schools and what those schools are. And so if you apply to 2 different programs that don't necessarily mesh, then they're going to start to question, okay, how serious are you really about our program? If you're also interested in this other one that doesn't really have anything to do with what we're doing here. The other piece of this that becomes challenging is if you've applied to 3 different programs that don't have a lot of overlap, then when you write your statement of purpose, it becomes much harder to explain what you want to do and why you're looking at these 3 different areas. It also becomes harder for your letters of recommendation to talk about what you want to do and your career interests and things like that if they're really disparate. So I mentioned this as something that you want to put some thought into. This shouldn't be just I really want to apply to this program, but I get 2 free ones. Let me just add a couple other programs on there, because that can sometimes come back to hurt your chances. But this does work really well if there truly are areas of interest in multiple programs, and it makes sense when you're writing your statement of purpose that, you know, I'm applying to this program and this program because my interests are this, and I can get there through either one of these channels. I'm interested in these faculty, I'm interested in this research, however that kind of comes along. So that's my one point of caution with this. Something that you can consider if you are someone who's really interested in 2 programs that are very different. You know, you have kind of 2 different career tracks in mind. They don't really overlap, but you're not really sure which way you want to go, but you could like X or you could like Y. You can still create 2 separate applications and pay the application fee separately for those. And then you'd have 2 first choice programs. You could then write 2 separate letters or 2 separate statements of purpose. You would have separate letters of recommendation that you could submit and keep those kind of separate to give yourself the best chance in kind of those disparate areas. So just something to think about as you're looking at the application. The other area that I wanted to look at here, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to kind of jump through a couple things that I wanted to highlight. If you come down here to the additional information section, this is how it kind of appears. We've talked about how on your application you can list different faculty members that you would be interested in working with. And so you want to be doing this research out on the website, identify professors that you're interested in working with. And so this is how that appears on the application. So you can list up to 5 faculty that you would be interested in working with. And if you did list more than one program, you can list them there. Just because there's five slots doesn't mean you need to fill all 5. If there's 3 faculty members that you're really interested in working with, you can just leave it at 3. I would encourage you to have at least a couple within each program that you're applying to, and up to 5 is fine. But don't feel like you have to. If there's 3 that really work in your area, don't feel like you need to list 2 others outside of your area just to fill those slots. The other area down here is kind of this funding area. So this is a question where if you do want to be considered for funding from Purdue, then you want to make sure you check these different boxes. If you've already received some kind of external funding, then you can note that here. If you have an external fellowship already, typically you're not going to know that at the time of application, but some different instances you might. And so if you do have that external funding, then you would note that here. And then there's just kind of some miscellaneous questions here. This recruitment program here, this is what is actually used for the application fee waiver. And so this is where you can see kind of the different opportunities that are here. So for example, that graduate showcase that I mentioned that we're going to be hosting, if you attend and participate in that and you receive the application fee waiver for that, then when you actually come to apply, you would click on that. What that does is once you save this page, it triggers an email to the grad school. They actually go and confirm that you really did participate in that event. So you can't just come in here and pick anything on the list and hope that it flies. They'll go and confirm that you did participate, that your name's on the list, and then they'll come in and waive the application fee for you. So it does take a little bit of time. So again, all this stuff takes time. Make sure you're applying early, because if you're waiting up until that last minute, then it might not give enough time for that process to happen. And then some of these questions, again, because this application is used for the whole university, may not be as relevant for engineering. Some of these questions are more important for other areas, but if you do happen to have any of these certifications, then you can certainly add them on. And then the last section that I wanted to show is the recommendation. So this is where you would come to actually list the professors that you're going to ask to write your letters of recommendation for you. And so you can kind of see what this looks like. You would come in, click on the add recommender, you fill out all of their information here. With these letters of recommendation, you have this option so typically, under just kind of typical, I'll call it higher ed law policy and federal guidelines and things like that. Typically, you can look at your academic record, and that would include the letters of recommendation that professors submit to the university. And so you can choose to waive that right and say, I'm not going to look at these letters of recommendation. I waive that right. Sometimes that makes the recommenders feel more free to write a good letter of recommendation for you. Sometimes it doesn't make any difference at all, but that's an option that's there. Or you can say, I don't waive my right. I do want to maintain that right to look at the letters if I want to. Typically, I'd say the majority of people do waive the right because there's just kind of this general sense out there that faculty are more likely to write the letters if they don't have to think about the student reading it, but not necessarily, and you don't have to waive that right. I actually didn't waive my right when I applied to grad school. That was just my approach. But that's what that means. And I would say most people typically will waive the right, because typically you don't go and look at the letters of recommendation afterwards anyway. So you would just fill out their information there, send to the recommender, and then you can see the list here. And the thing that's really nice here is that you can see what the status is. And so in this sample here, you can tell that this professor already submitted their letter of recommendation. So you know that one's in. You can't actually see the letter, but you can tell that it has submitted. In this case, you can see that this one is not submitted yet. So as you get closer to that deadline, you can come in here and you can click to send a reminder, and that will send an email out to the faculty member to do that. You can also come in here and do what they call exclude. So if a professor comes back to you and says, you know what, I'm not able to write a letter after all, you can come in, add another recommender, and then come in and exclude this one that you've already got there. So there's ways to kind of manage this letter of recommendation process. So what happens once you filled that out, you do want to make sure that you have talked to your professor ahead of time, because as soon as you fill that out and save it, an email goes to the professor that you put in there. And this is what that email looks like. So I'll give you a peek behind the curtain. This is what the faculty member sees. So it's saying that, that you requested this letter of recommendation. And so again, this is why you want to talk to your professors first, because number one, if they're not expecting this email, they could just delete it, could get lost in their email. Or, they might be a little bit taken aback if they're getting this kind of generic email and you haven't asked them already. So once they get this email, then you can just click on this submit recommendation, and this form comes up that they would fill out. So it has your applicant information at the top. The recommender can update the information there. And then these are the questions that it asks, how long have they known you, in what capacity? And then they're talking about the comparison group. So for most of you, if you're applying right from your undergrad, comparison group is going to be college seniors. And then this next section is all a series of kind of comparisons on these different qualities. So how, in their mind, how do you rate to the other, to your peers? Are you in the highest kind of top 1% to 2%, top 10%? How do you rate on these different qualities? And so they come through and check all those out. They have an option of saying that they think that you're the best student they've had this year or in the last 5 years or in X years. And then they can give an overall recommendation. And then there's an option here where they can upload a letter. And I can tell you that this is really important. And most faculty members that you ask are going to know this, but it's really important that they actually upload a letter and not just fill out that form so that they have that information. All right, that is what I wanted to run through for tonight.
There have been a lot of questions.
I was gonna say, I can see there's a lot of questions coming in there. Do you want to moderate for me, Jackie? Pull out ones.
So there was some questions about, do you have to, put multiple graduate programs? You don't have to, you can just select one, and that's totally cool. Application fee waivers, if you meet someone at a conference, it's good for about 2 to 3 years.
2 years at Purdue.
Yep. 2 years, at Purdue. And there was a question, like if you're attending a conference in November, but like if you're applying in December, does that time frame still work? And the answer is yes. But you want to make sure that you're, again, meeting and talking with the recruiter. If that's a Purdue program, you always want to confirm how long the application fee waiver is good for. And then there was a question about external funding and internal funding, and if you can have both at the same time. So Bruce, I think I answered that. So you won't have both at the same time, but over the length of your graduate study, you might be funded by an NSF and then maybe by a Purdue doctoral during different years. So, and I would definitely refer you to the funding video. That was the pre-watch for today. If you have other questions about fellowships, assistantships, hopefully that video will help clarify. And you can certainly ask your grad mentors in their circles. Any other, I think I might have hit on everything or replied to it in the chat. Any other questions here? Well, we can do another couple minutes for questions, then we'll move into breakout rooms. Feel free to throw it in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. Was that helpful going over the application and seeing kind of the back end? Okay, I see some nods. You always wonder what other people get. So Chloe asked, do all the application portals have that ranking system for recommenders?
Yeah, not necessarily all of them. I think it's pretty.
You are robotic, Janet.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know why this happens, but if I click my microphone on and off, I usually come back okay. So yeah, so typically they're not all going to be exactly the same, but they're all going to have something like that. And usually it is kind of a percentage based like that. There are others that just do more of a Likert scale of, how do you rate, from poor to excellent. There is some variety out there.
Cool. So right now we're going to break off into breakout rooms so you can chat with your circle. I'm dropping right now some of the talking points in the chat. So mentors, feel free to use this as a guide or, go wherever the conversation's bringing you, but certainly want to discuss the graduate application process. How we're going to do breakout rooms is, again, I'm going to open the breakout rooms and you can move yourself into your circle. So I'll set that. I'm also enabling screen share. So if anyone wants to share their screen, please feel free to do that. So I am opening rooms now and we'll have breakouts until 8:20 or so, and then we'll pull everyone back and to kind of debrief together as a group and talk about, what we're going to be doing in October. So I'm opening these now, and go have fun and go chat. So, and if you need help moving into a room, just let me know. But you guys should be able to just tap that breakout room button and move yourself into your circle. Cool. You guys are doing good.